Station 51, engine 27, engine 32, truck 105.
You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf.
Welcome back to The Fire Break. It's good to see you again. I have got an amazing guest coming up in just a minute. You're going to find out. All right, I'm just going to tell you, this is Frank Leeb right here. Frank is one of the top guys from the NYFD, probably the most loved fire department in the world, and certainly the most respected. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. We're building some innovative technology. Frank, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, my brother. Appreciate
it. Boy, nice to have a fellow New Yorker on the show for a change. Huh? I mean, the whole fire thing is California, and it's not the same, right?
It's not the same. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Yeah,
it is. So tell me about the work you did when you were with the New York City Fire Department.
Yeah, so I did just under 32 years with the FDNY, and in the last 4.5 years, I was considered what's called a staff chief, which the positions I held in those years were chief of the fire academy, chief of training, and chief of safety. And now that I've retired, I took on a job being the managing director of the First Responder Center for Excellence. They're an affiliate organization of the National Fallen Firefighter Foundation. So the National Fallen Firefighter Foundation, most people are aware of them and what they do. They honor our nation's fallen firefighters. They do an amazing job. And I like to joke around with Victor Stagnaro, who's the CEO of both organizations. And I say, my job is to put you out of business and not have no firefighters to honor. So quite a lofty goal, but it's, the whole point of being is that we have to do better in making sure that we're protecting our firefighters.
So in any realm, there's always better to be done, right? I'm sure
in
you
any
can walk
realm,
into
that's right.
Any operation, any fire operation, like you could always look around and see what could be done better. How do you prioritize, where you want to focus the efforts that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the majority of our efforts are focused on what I call the firefighter blindside, which are those things that we don't necessarily see coming. And that's because what do firefighters do? We make sure that we are very good at what we do, our tactics, that we know what we're doing. So we're brilliant at the basics, but there's a higher risk of cardiovascular, there's a higher risk of cancer. And you think, so those are the blindside issues where, we're worried about the basics in fighting fires. And the next thing you know, around the left side comes cancer and you're sacked by cancer or cardio issue or PTSD, sleep, nutrition, all of those different things. So by virtue of training and education, we improve our safety on and off the fireground, but our primary focus is on those off the fireground things. So we've done in the fire service, we've done a good job of reducing our on-scene line of duty deaths. We still have work to do, but we've kept our eye on the ball and look at, so the wildland, they use the watch outs that you have to, what are the different watch outs that there are for firefighting? And we know some of those on the fireground. We know bowstring truss roofs. We know that fires in places of worship. We know different types of lightweight construction. We know some of the ways in which we've had our members killed in the line of duty. So we've done a good job, but we still have a long way to go in all of those blindside issues. Cardiac and cancer being 1 and 1A, right? They're both, they kill an awful lot of firefighters off the fireground. So we need to do more in those realms to reduce, to save the savable, reduce those line of duty deaths.
Okay. So you get, there's a lot, so you do a lot of research, the science comes out. Some of the science is done internally in the department, and then some of it is academic work. And how do you go about bridging the academic side or the research side into operational changes?
Yeah, it's a great question because at the end of the day, research without implementation it's just another report that sits on the shelf and nobody ever does anything. So what the FRCE does, we look for the actionable intelligence within the reports. We are the translator to the fire service, to the firefighter. What's the so what in the research? What do we want firefighters to know about that's in the research? So we take that and we work hand in hand with the researchers. A lot of times we support or will be involved in the research while it's happening real time. And then we take that and we'll either do in-person training, and sometimes we do an awful lot of online training as well, as we're building out our online platform, which is all no-cost training for people who want to go onto our learning management system. And that's all the stuff that the firefighter needs to know, right? He's taking that research and making sure that it's actionable for us. So it's combining research and experience for best practices on and off the fireground, because ultimately that gives us the best result. In anything that we're talking about, when you could combine the two and say, this is what the research is saying, but guess what? So is our data. Our data and our actual what's going on, they match. But here's how we can reduce that, right? So we're at the end of the day, it's risk management. How do we best manage our risk to our people? And that's by making sure that we are matching the research with the best practices for optimal outcomes, combining that with our experience.
And then it's a feedback loop cycle, right? You get some research, you make some changes, you see how the changes are doing, you do some more research.
And a lot of times that winds up, hey, we need more research in this area. So how can we, we've done a good job here, but now we've seen this happen. How do we reduce the risk here, or what can we do for here? Because what we don't want to have where everything's just opinion based, because it's very hard to get funding for different initiatives when it's just Frank Leeb's opinion, right, or Steve Wolf's opinion. It needs to be, we need to have something to back it up, and that's where the research partners are critically important. And when you look at research in the fire service, we are really in the Enlightenment era of research. You think about the amount of research that has been done, where we have come in the last 15, 20, 25 years, is really enormous. And that has made a big difference in funding opportunities to get departments to be in better compliance with some of the initiatives. It has led to by virtue of the training and education, a safer environment, which, safety is a byproduct of our training. So if you have the training and education, you are therefore safer because you understand the risks and the hazards, those watch outs, you understand those. So you're better able to take care of yourself, your crew, and ultimately that leads to a more resilient and productive firefighter, which is what we want to do, right? We want to extend the lives of our firefighters, or the useful, add some useful years on to the firefighters' lives, because that's what we see, is that the life of a firefighter is often cut short for different, for various reasons.
I see. So when you said like knowing more safety makes you safer, but really the ability to implement that in the face of all of the other things competing in your mind at the same time is just as important, right? Because I'm sure you've had a lot of times where you train somebody to do something and then you put them in the field and there wasn't enough evidence, right? The training didn't come out because it's not ingrained.
Yeah, and sometimes the implementation piece is a huge part of this puzzle. And that's why the training, right? So sound practices have sound reasoning. So if I'm able to tell you this is why we should be doing something, and I could back that up with data and statistics, well, my hope is that would increase the likelihood of you complying. But as we build those into our everyday cultures and routines, they become part of what we do. It's like safety. To me, safety is, unless you're the safety chief. When I was the safety chief, or when I was the incident commander, I could parse out safety because I would be viewing safety from the lens of strictly that's my job. But as a firefighter operating on the fireground, safety is a byproduct of the training that I have. I know what I should and shouldn't be doing based on that. So, operating safely on the fireground, I say in my career, I haven't thought about when I went into a fire, I knew what I was doing. So I wasn't thinking, wow, this isn't safe. I knew what I can do based on my training. The job at hand was paramount based on the training that I had. So the better your training and education is, the safer you're going to operate on a fireground, because you're operating and approaching at it from a higher level. And I think that's an important that's an important consideration, because if you take someone who has no training and tell them you should search that building, they, you know, they're not going to know how to do it, so they're not going to operate safely.
Right.
But to me, it's just
Right.
it runs in the background. I haven't gone to the fire scene and said, "Oh boy, this is not safe." No, my training has told me go in that window instead of that window, approach it from a different exposure side, or whatever it is that is what we're going to do. So trying to even change the narrative of that you know, the better trained you are, the safer that you're naturally going to operate, because you're better.
Right.
You know, that's in any profession. The more input in equals input out, right? You're going to wind up being better at anything that you do in life if you put the time and effort into it. Sets and reps, right? Make sure that you're good at what you do.
Yeah, right. So the safest way to deal with a building fire would just be run away from the building, right? Because nothing's going to happen to you then.
Yeah.
Right?
So don't respond, right? It's safe in the firehouse, so don't. But you know, and that's why I say we need to change the narrative.
Yeah, because when they say safety first, okay, well then stay home, because that's safer than going to work. So there's a mission, and so the mission comes first, and then safety is interwoven into that to the degree that it's possible.
Yeah, know your job and do your job, and safety is is woven into every fabric of that, and that's the message that we need to get out there: is that safety is a byproduct of your training. It's not going to the scene and saying I got to operate as safe as I can here. No, I got to operate at the highest level that I could possibly do, and that is by training and making sure that it is a never-ending quest to be better, because that's how, you know, our goal should be to make ourselves hard to injure and impossible to kill, while also enabling us to fulfill our mission of saving lives.
Right. Yes.
You know, and if we're getting there and if we're worried solely about our safety, and that's the view if that's the lens that we're looking at it from, I think we're missing the mark. And
absolutely.
Again, if you're the safety chief, or you're the safety officer, or the incident commander, those people need to look at the lens. They need to look at it through a different lens. And the safety chief, for sure, has to be looking at it from safety, right? I see a firefighter so if a firefighter is if he's doing something that's unsafe, or she's doing something that's unsafe, that means they may not be as well trained. So, but that is that individual, or whether it's incident commander or safety officer or chief, they are basically the safety net for the entire fireground. So they're watching, and you could tell a new firefighter from an experienced firefighter by the way they're operating on a fireground, especially when they do something that doesn't the risk that they're taking, even if they're well trained, doesn't match the fire scene, whatever that is. So we know we're going to push the limits. We know the conditions that we're going into in most cases, right? So I see the smoke is pushing out of a window, but I have confirmation that somebody's in that structure. Well, I'm going to push it a little more, knowing that. But my training knows that, hey, I may not have a lot of time in here, so I better hurry up. But you know that, and you're able to make that based on your training. And I think that's an important part. That I'm not just saying, well, that's not safe, regardless of whether somebody's in there. That's not safe. No, that's not. Who's looking at it like that? I'm looking at it as there's someone in there, and I'm gonna go in there based on my training. And you hear this: risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little. I get that, and that is part of the decision making process. But it's based on your training, because my opinion of risking a lot may be different than somebody who's not well trained. So to me, I may not think it's risking a lot to go in a window when there's somebody in there, when I know, hey, this is close to flashing over, but I believe I have enough time to get in there based on my training that I could get in there and save a life. So I would do that, where someone who doesn't have the training and is going to say, whoa, that's not an opportunity to go in there. And they may deem it to be too unsafe, so I think it's a byproduct of training. And the more you train, the better you are. And I've seen this in my career. I have seen well-trained firefighters save lives so many times. I remember as a firefighter working with this one firefighter, Greg Haynes. And this guy would pull up at a fully involved structural fire. And we'd pull up, I was working in Squad 270 with him. And there'd be fire coming out every window. And the next thing you know, this firefighter would go around the rear, he'd find another way in, and he finds a victim in the building. And,
Wow.
this firefighter wasn't being reckless. This firefighter was well trained, and he just instinctually always knew the way to go, to get to that victim. And I think that's the difference of being a good firefighter or being a great firefighter. And who do you want showing up to your house when it's on fire? Do you want the minimally trained firefighter, or do you want Greg Haynes, or a firefighter that's really into the? Yeah, everybody exactly.
Right.
And that's why we as leaders have to demand that we're training. Firefighters have to demand training and make sure, relevant, high fidelity, frequent training, because that saves the lives of those that we're sworn to protect, but it also protects the firefighter.
I see. The training for most of the things related to NYFD are structure fire, right? I mean, it's a city. But lately in the news, we've been seeing crews called out to wildfires, northern Manhattan, upstate. Like wildfires are starting to come to New York, another export from California, and it's getting hotter, drier, and windier everywhere. So a lot of places aren't prepared for wildfire. When I saw the trucks respond, last week to the Upper Manhattan fire, it's like those were structure fire firefighters, wearing structural turnout gear. Is there going to have to be some more cross training into wildland fire techniques now?
Yeah, and I think so. They did a nice job. One of the things, because they had several hundred brush fires going in over a several day period, and that's something we just simply don't get. In the spring and the fall, we typically know that 15 mile an hour winds or greater, no rain for 3 or more days. So we have and low humidity. That's kind of what the FDNY has taught for years in our brush fire manual. But you're right, we don't really have a lot of training in handling these. I guess the saving grace, in a sense, is that we don't have the hundreds of acres that are capable of burning as there are other places. But we do, and we've seen that now upstate, where firefighters from all over New York State went to the upstate areas where they were having it. And I would say that by and large, these firefighters don't have that training. So we certainly need to have structural firefighters need to be better prepared for the wildland interface firefighting. I mean, because we saw it in Lahaina, we've seen it in other places where these could get out of control. And if you're not prepared for it, in my career, I've responded to a bunch of brush fires in New York City where they'd make it a second alarm fire, a third alarm fire. And we have a couple of brush fire units, and we activate those in the time periods that we believe that there's a higher prevalence of the fires, and they're usually pretty accurate. But oftentimes we would take the hose right off of the fire truck and be stretching it in, and it's just, it's tactics that wouldn't be practical, out in the middle of a forest, whether it be upstate or California or anywhere else. So that cross-pollination, that cross-training in some of these certainly needs to happen. We use our structural firefighting gear. The firefighters in the FDNY don't have a separate, they don't have a wildland gear. But we do have a procedure that talks a little bit about wildland, brush fires, as we call them in New York City. But yeah, I think this year is certainly an eye opener for everybody in New York State, for sure, because what we experienced and what we've seen this year is certainly something that we haven't seen before. And what they wound up doing, one of the good things that I saw the FDNY did was they put these teams together to go out and combat them while they're having it. So they put these task forces together to combat them. But I would be pretty certain that they're going to look into this further in coordination probably with New York State in how do we better train and prepare us with the FRCE, with the First Responder Center for Excellence. We are going to we're in the process of working on some wildland interface and training for firefighters that work in those spaces, particularly with the blindside issues, as I mentioned, but because there's not a lot of training out there for those firefighters. So we have 2 different modules that we're currently working on, and we hope to have those out certainly within the next year, hopefully a little bit sooner than that, because we see what's going on in those areas, and there's a gap. That training gap is there, and we hope to address that. And again, these will all be no charge training for firefighters, which is one of the biggest challenges. Is that so even if you do it in person, a lot of these areas are remote, so it's hard to get enough firefighters into an area to attend an in-person training. Especially to make it cost effective, because it's not really cost effective to show up to do an in-person training and 10 people show up. But
Right.
Online, people could take it from wherever they are, and in an hour they could get some training.
Do you think that people who are aware of these new brush fires going in New York, are they thinking of that as like, wow, what a freak week we had, or are they seeing this as this is a sign of what the future looks like? Like this is here to stay.
So that's a loaded question. I mean, I think it's the leadership of the job is evaluating this from what's the changing dynamics here, right? And is this a sign of, with a changing climate, are these the things that are changing? And how do we need to build our resiliency and our ability to respond to these? And I think from the overall leadership, they're certainly going to be looking at this from more than just an anomaly of an event. So we are used to having a certain amount of fires and sometimes large fires in areas that are wooded. But I think where they have to make sure that they are focusing on is that urban interface where these areas that may not be large, can they, is there enough resiliency built in? Is there enough fire protection to ensure that we don't lose an entire neighborhood? So I think what we've seen in New York, and again, I'm retired since June, so I don't know exactly what they're doing, but I know the leadership, and the leadership is the uniform leadership of the FDNY is solid. And I think they're looking at that from a longer term, what is the outcome of if we continue to see these things, and what do we need to do and make sure, and those are going to be, I would assume, taking pages right out of the areas that have that, the Lahaina report, others, where the right conditions, that those things can happen anywhere, as we've seen them, right? California has had multiple of those. Other, there's plenty of states in the Midwest that have had a lot of experience with that. We're losing entire neighborhoods. So I think that's where they have to be looking at and make sure that they're building in that direction to make sure that, is this an anomaly? It's hard to say because we continue to see these anomalies everywhere. So I would say we should be planning for what is probably the inevitability, which these will continue as we see changes in the climate. Yeah. So we have to make sure that we're preparing for that.
Yeah, I mean, Lahaina, right, starts as a brush fire, takes out a whole city. The Marshall Fire here in Boulder, starts in
there's so many
area,
right?
Boom, takes out 1,100 homes.
Yeah, Paradise. I mean, you look at in the last bunch of years, there's been a lot of anomalies. At some point, you say it's not an anomaly anymore. It may be an anomaly for your area, but and that's why you have to take a more global view and say it's not happening here. But why wouldn't it happen here? are we taking the prudent steps to ensure that, are we learning from everyone from everywhere else to make sure that we don't have that here? And I think that's the important takeaway for areas that aren't seeing it. Why are you not seeing it? Have you just been lucky, or are you taking the proactive steps to make sure that you don't? And learning from others is the best way to do that before you experience. Why continue to reinvent the wheel when other places have unfortunately had to go through that, when we can learn a lot from those fires?
Right. Yeah. And when you look at, the day before Lahaina, the day before Paradise, and the day before the Marshall Fire, people would have been well within their right to say that doesn't happen here.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
yeah.
So, yeah. So I'm hoping that the people who are in areas where they're saying it doesn't happen here will say, but it will, but it could.
Yeah, totally agree. And what's to say, in the right conditions, it could happen. It could happen anywhere.
Yeah,
and you think about, so the fires that were burning in upstate New York, just not that long ago, right? Now they have the lake effect snow and the cold weather that they've been experiencing. And I saw on the news the other day how much that helped them, that they had the snowstorm. So I don't, to have to rely on the blizzard is not, is not a prudent strategy or tactic, right?
Unless you can call in a blizzard, right?
Unless you can call in a blizzard, but none of us have been able to figure that one out yet.
We're building hurricanes on wheels using jet engines to propel retardant at fires, at hurricane speeds and forces. So we'll see if that idea of a hurricane on demand, allows you to change wind directions and becomes a useful tool.
And you think about even technology such as AI, right? And when the predictability of where there's going to be a fire and when, is promising. So there's a lot of promising technology out there to help us, but we still have to make sure that we are implementing, some of the strategies that'll minimize the risk. Right? Again, we're risk managers at the end of the day.
Right. So you retired in June, and here it is, December, and in just 6 months, you're already in Florida.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I have. It just so happens that I'm in Florida as we're recording this, but and I'm going to be going to a couple of conferences. So it's not bad that I'm in Florida in December and I'm doing a couple of conferences while I'm here. But I wind up going and speaking to different departments and conferences quite frequently on leadership, on tactics, on strategy, on different health-related topics, particularly cancer in the fire service. So yeah, I've been in some cold areas, I've been in some warm areas, but it's certainly nice to be in a warm climate area when it is pretty chilly back home.
Yeah, you've been getting a lot of snow up there. There was a big storm last week, right?
Yeah, big storm in upstate New York, in the Buffalo area. But New York City, I think they were getting some wintry precipitation now or in the next couple of days, but they haven't had anything major. They're probably waiting for me to come home next week.
Yeah, right. Tell me, so in the last 6 months, since you haven't had, assigned active duty assignments, every day, and you get a chance to kind of pull back and see a bigger picture because you maybe have some time to yourself. What kind of perspective changes have you experienced, since retiring? And I know you're active, with your organization, but what's it like, being out and looking from the outside?
Well, so the biggest thing about being retired from, without the greatest fire department in the world, in my opinion, I loved working there. I joke around. I say I could live to be 150 years old. I'll never satisfy my appetite to go to fires. I love going to fires. I love being around the brothers and sisters in the firehouse. I love the people I work with. I love the organization. I always will. And so take that out of it. And every once in a while, I'll see a fire. There was a fire where I was a battalion chief the other day in in a strip mall taxpayer. And so I knew a lot of firefighters were there, and I saw videos of it. So I miss that, right? When you hear about fires that you're missing, and I think about the brothers and sisters and and how well trained they are, and it still brings a sense of pride. But for me, with the job that I've taken on now with the First Responder Center for Excellence, in a great sense, it's a continuation of some of the stuff that I was doing with the FDNY. In the FDNY, I was the chair of our contamination reduction work group since its inception in 2017 until I retired. When I was the chief of safety, the topic that we did we do a safety week every year, and the topic we did was suicide awareness. So these blindside topics have been on the top of my mind for quite some time, and I try and leverage. When I go and teach and when I do stuff to make sure that I incorporate some of those in there because, again, we've done a good job of lessening the amount of firefighters we lose on the fireground, but not so much off the fireground. So, and really that's been a part of, I'm tired of seeing my friends die. And sometimes they may not die. Sometimes their careers are cut short for illnesses and injuries. And there's just, to me, that's still such a huge blind spot, that blindside area for us that we can do better. So I've been working in that area, working with the researchers, whether it's on lithium-ion batteries, whether it's on, working with UL. I was on one of their technical panels. When I was active with the FDNY, I sat on 3 NFPA committees. I was heavily engaged in the national conversation for many years now. So my viewpoint on a lot of these topics really hasn't changed. I just look at them more probably from a global perspective or a national perspective on what we can do better, and see the differences from areas around the country. How some departments are doing a lot, and oftentimes they're doing a lot because they have strong leadership and they have support from the public and from the elected officials to make sure that they're best protecting their first responders. And I've seen areas, unfortunately, that really aren't doing much. And I probably get asked the most, especially when I go and speak about leadership, on the breaks or afterwards, the most frequent question I get is, what do you do when you have poor leadership at the top of your organization? And for me, that was a change. I really didn't experience that in the FDNY. The FDNY has a very deep bench and a lot of really solid leadership on the uniform side. And I think that's, that's indicative of the culture, of the training, of all the programs that they have. So I never saw that. So hearing this from other people, I've realized how much of a challenge it is. And, the message to those folks that if you have poor leadership, or you're a firefighter, or you're an officer, a lieutenant, or a captain, is you got to start it organically and lead by example with your crew. And if you do that, you will build a winning mindset, a winning culture, and you will build a following. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, the biggest learning point for me would be, it solidified my viewpoints on that. Is we need, ideally we need leadership that leads at the top of their department, that cares for their people and is making sure that the known best practices are being implemented. I'm not talking about the practices that really have no backing or validity. There are some snake oil salesmen out there that will sell you stuff that really isn't going to get you a good return on your investment. So you really have to be engaged, dialed in, and watch what the major organizations are talking about, what they're highlighting, what they're putting out, because those should be the trusted sources of information. The FRCE, what we put out, is trusted information, and making sure that you are getting the best return on your investment, whether you're bringing in people to educate your firefighters in whatever topic you're talking about, or whether we're spending money on new gear or new equipment, whatever it is, or even making sure that our firefighters are getting proper physicals. Make sure that you're following the guidelines that are backed in research, because that's gonna better protect you from making sure that you don't spend money on stuff that you then regret down the road. Because, boy, it takes so much effort to get back to square one. If you make a mistake, if you make a misstep and go in a direction that really wasn't the best way, to get back to square one, no less to get to improvement, it takes a lot. And in the FDNY, we've been, in my time with this, I've been very, very cautious about when we implement something. We don't jump for the next shiny thing. We make sure that it's proven, it has some research backing it, third-party research, and that what we're doing is going to give us the best return on our investment. And between our research and development arm of the FDNY and all of the different things that are built in, it is a process that is proven to work, which is why a lot of folks implement what the FDNY does, because of our robust research and development, because of the number of fires we go to, all of that stuff. Yeah, helps.
Yeah, no. So it means that the process of trying out new technologies can be slower, but when you finally roll it out, it's going to be the right product.
Yeah, and it'll be tested because I'll use a couple of years ago, we were looking at new firefighting gloves, and we went through the whole process. The process is a minimum of 9 months. The company was awarded the gloves. They made the shipment. And like in the first week, we had firefighters that burnt their hands with the new gloves. The gloves were then sent to testing, and it wound up that they weren't manufactured the way the spec was supposed to be. So it took the FDNY a week because of the amount of fire duty and runs that we have. So if you were to take a smaller department, say my volunteer department that does 2,000 runs a year and goes to a handful of fires, it might have taken 10 years. So the accelerated process on making sure that a product is good, even when it gets to the field and is field tested, it's like ages in dog years as compared to anywhere else. Where if something's not right, we know it immediately, as opposed to a smaller department that wouldn't put it through its paces. Might take years to see if there's a flaw in the design.
I see. Yeah. So a lot of testing happens really fast, and you really put more cycles on everything, so you figure out whether it really holds up or not.
Exactly. Yep.
So you talked about blind side issues, cancer, heart disease, suicide. What are the strategies that you're using right now to minimize those incidents?
Well, so when we talk about cancer, making sure that our firefighters are getting annual medicals. So that's important because we know we have a higher prevalence of cancer. So making sure that we're getting physicals will make sure that we pick up the cancer early. However, what we want to do, that's a very downstream intervention. We need to go upstream and make sure that our firefighters are being physically fit. That's going to be, think about, the firefighters, right? And that are out there for days on a deployment, right? Like they're aware of rhabdomyolysis, right? The structural firefighting world is only just starting to learn about rhabdomyolysis and stuff like that. So making sure that our firefighters recognize that and understand that, I think, is critically important. Physical fitness, making sure that our nutrition is proper for those type of things. When we think about reducing cancer, making sure that we're minimizing our exposure to smoke, because no smoke is good smoke. Even if you're out in the middle of a forest, that smoke is not good for you. And you talk about a wicked problem, right? How do we best protect those firefighters, right? So structural firefighter, you use your SCBA and you keep it on, but how do you best protect the firefighter that's going to be out there for 2 weeks and in a remote area? It's a very different challenge, but we certainly have to know that no smoke is good smoke, and we need to minimize that exposure. We also have to make sure that we're cleaning the soot off of us as quickly as we can, showering as soon as we can. Again, other challenges that if you're out there deployed for a couple of weeks, living in a tent, that's going to be very difficult. So those are the things, and finding the ways that we can best implement those policies and procedures in a meaningful way, but also incorporating common sense into it. So common sense is a big part of this, right? So we know ideally we don't want you to be exposed to smoke, but we know that to have zero smoke exposure is really not realistic. But there's ways that we can do better. So, and that's where we have to focus our efforts, is on the low hanging fruit, on what we can do better today to best protect ourselves. And, fighting a fire from upwind, right? Being downwind of a fire is bad. It doesn't matter what type of fire it is. You're in the path of the fire potentially, or you're, or if it's a wind impacted event in a structure, you're in the barrel of the gun. So that's not where you want to be. So just that's simply going to minimize your exposure. Staging our crews in the proper location. All of these different things are going to make a meaningful difference. And again, it's. I wish there was a silver bullet. I wish there was one thing that I could tell you and say, this, if you do this, you're going to be fine. But there's not. There's so many different things that we need to be doing. And I tell firefighters, you put your gear on and now you come back from a run, whatever it is. It could have been nothing. Wash your hands when you're done, because even our gear, our gear has chemicals and stuff in it that aren't good for us. So just even if you didn't have a fire, make sure that you're doing those little things. I've been telling my kids since they're 2 to wash their hands, and now it's a pretty good strategy for firefighters. Wash your hand after every response. Shower before you go home. Don't store
don't bring your duty gear into the living quarters, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Those are simple things that we could be doing, simple common sense things. Because in most departments, all the tools that you need, you may have. In the FDNY, we have SCBAs, we have decon support units, all these different things. It comes down to implementation and enforcement of policies and procedures. So to make sure that we are best protecting our people, and that's the job. So everybody needs to have a personal responsibility for their own health and wellness, right? At the end of the day, it's your health, but leadership has the obligation to have policies and procedures that best protect our people, and they need to enforce them. And, and enforcement doesn't have to be punitive. Enforcement starts with education. Like I said earlier, sound practices have sound reasoning. And when you educate your firefighters, education changes culture, changes practice, changes what we do when firefighters understand the why behind it. And then a degree of enforcement makes sure that we get some of the non-conformance to conform.
Right. Uniformity is a form of a pressure to conform in itself.
Yeah, and sometimes, so when you think about the crew boss or the lieutenant or the first line supervisor, right? So it's critical for those individuals to maintain a trusting working relationship with their firefighters. So if leadership doesn't demonstrate the importance of a policy, and that one line boss is enforcing all of the policies, that person's trust and confidence with their crew is going to be eroded, because people will think that that officer is the only one enforcing all of these rules. So if leadership doesn't demonstrate its importance to the membership, well, then when they don't have officers that are gonna enforce the policy, well, they know why, because they failed to demonstrate that it's important to the job. So I like to say there's things that should be non-negotiable. Give me the list. As the leader of your organization, you should have non-negotiables. These are the things that you must do. And leaders at lower levels must enforce these non-negotiables. And when they don't, leadership has to take action to ensure that, because that enables the first line supervisor, that lower level supervisor, to maintain that critical trust and working relationship that they must have with their firefighters. So if leadership puts the rules out and then is absent about enforcement, and then don't expect your lower line officers to do your job and enforce those policies without you showing that they're important. because you
Right,
need to give the
absolutely.
support to those officers that are trying to do their job while balancing making sure that they have the working relationship with their crews. That is so important on the fire ground. When you're out there doing the work, you must be able to know that your officer has your back, and you need to know that your firefighters support you in what you're doing. That relationship is the most critical relationship that exists in the fire service. And if we don't have leaders that back that up and support that and give those leaders the support, then it's a little bit difficult to expect success as the leader if you're not making sure that your leader's intent is clear and say, these are my non-negotiables. These are the policies that we're going to enforce. These matter because these are going to keep you safer on the fire ground, right? So safer on the fire ground could be simply making sure that you're wearing your equipment properly, right? That's not going to impact on operations. That's going to impact potentially on your health and wellness in the long term. But leadership has to demonstrate the importance, not just in writing the policy, but also demonstrating that in making sure that they are holding their people accountable. Because if everybody holds their people accountable at every rank, if there's accountability, we have a high functioning organization at every single level. And I like to say, have a standard, hold your people accountable. You show that you love and care for them by doing that.
And is that one of the strategies that that you bring to the leadership role, or that you recommend for leaders? Is they've got to show they love and care for their people?
Yeah, I tell you what, I think so. For me, in my career, I've had so many leaders that have loved and cared for me and have taken me under their wing and made me better at every at every step that they could. And I am so grateful for them for that. I've done that in my career. And when you have a firefighter that comes up to you and tells you, they just became a lieutenant or whatever, and they tell you the impact that you've had on their career, that matters, right? That you're impacting the legacy and the future of your organization. When I was at the fire academy, I would love it when I would see we would have units come there for the day. An engineer truck would come for a day of training, and they would run into instructors. They would pull up, and I'd see them. A firefighter that graduated 2 or 3 years ago from the fire academy, sometimes longer, would see one of the instructors, and they'd go over and give him a great big bear hug. And I would migrate over there just to listen in on the conversation from afar and to hear the firefighters say how much of an impact that those people had on their career is nothing better. And I think about the people, I went through the Proby School in the FDNY in 1992. And I remember Lieutenant McJunkin, who was our drill instructor. And I remember how hard he was on us. He was hard but fair the entire time because he recognized that we were now a member of his FDNY family. And he wanted to make sure that we were ready. And then I remember as the last couple of weeks of Proby School, how he softened up on us a little bit, started telling us different stories, really getting us prepared to go into the FDNY. I remember working a tour with him when I worked. I remember another instructor, Steve Humaninski, who was at the time was assigned to Engine 283. I got assigned to his battalion, and I remember going and working in his firehouse, and like this guy was he taught me so much in Proby School, and now I was going to have the opportunity to work with him. Think about if that guy was a jerk. What if he taught me nothing? What if all he did was pound me into the ground and taught me nothing? Now I go work with him. Now I'm an equal as a firefighter, right? So making sure that we treat our people the right way when we are new in the organization, that they're a member of your team. Treat them be hard on them. We have to make sure that they're good for the organization. But recognize that when they graduate Proby School, they're going to be working there on a line with you. They're going to be in a truck company with you. And, to me, those are the two people I still remember from 1992. And there's some others that I remember, especially some of the Probies I went to school with. But those impacts are lifelong.
Yes.
Be worthy of it and make sure that you're doing the best you can to fulfill that, because you are forming the culture of your organization. every day with the people that you're running into, especially your newer firefighters.
That's such a great message, Frank.
Thank you.
And the fact that, you remember the names of the people who took the time to encourage you and make sure you had the skills that you needed, and to give you faith in yourself at a time when you're just coming in and you have doubt about yourself. That sense of loaned courage, loaned confidence that they give you really helps
Yeah,
you
and
grow.
that's all the stuff throughout my career that we're all a collection of all of our experiences and all of the people that we've ever run into in life, and we pull different parts of that, and we hopefully come up with what we think will be a good leader or a good boss or just a good human being by taking each of those little parts. And there's been so many people. Again, the FDNY was such a deep bench. I talk about those two individuals. They have no idea I speak about them. And it's, it's humbling because of the deep bench that we have and the way, the way an FDNY firefighter is throughout their career, having been exposed to so many different people and so many different sets and reps. We're going out the door so often. It really has set a good foundation for me.
Yeah, and that what I would call a mentorship relationship, where people really take you under their wing. The way you describe that, it sounds like something very intentional that a good leader can choose to do.
Yeah, and really, mentorship in the FDNY is ingrained in our DNA. It's from the beginning, and it never ends. I mean, when I went to the chief of the fire, I used the last three positions: chief of fire academy, chief of training, and chief of safety. When I went to those, retired members that held those positions reached out to me to give me their wisdom, even though they're retired. And some of them didn't retire on their own terms, but they always put the FDNY first and foremost. It's the FDNY way. It's just in the DNA of the FDNY. You get to a new firehouse, or someone you're working just for the day, and you take that crew under your wing if you're the new captain or new lieutenant, or a new probie comes into the firehouse, and you want to make sure that you make that probie, the new firefighter, the best they can be. That's all ingrained in the culture and the DNA of the FDNY. I say it's the FDNY way. And I've never seen any other way in that organization.
It sounds like organizations in all endeavors would benefit from learning about the NYFD way.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like you could write a book on business leadership, but it's all based on lessons from, FDNY.
Yeah. Which I did. I wrote. I have a book out, "Cornerstones of Leadership" on and off the fireground.
I set you up for that, Frank.
I appreciate the setup. Yeah. So I didn't miss it, I don't think. But so "Cornerstones of Leadership" on and off the fireground is time-tested leadership principles that are told with fireground stories and from experiences of so many of the amazing people that have really defined my leadership strategy, the way I conduct myself. And in my career, I've had some crazy responses. I've had some crazy calls I've gone on, deployments I've gone on, and I put many of those stories in the book. And each of them provides several leadership takeaways at the end of the chapter. And then there's over 100 takeaways listed in the back of the book as well. I love chapters that I could read the chapter and then tell me what the takeaways of the chapter are, because that's what I do when I read a book. I take notes, and so I made it where you don't need to take notes. You could read it, and then at the end of the chapter, there's your takeaways, and at the end of the book, I list all the takeaways as well. And the feedback on that, I've had people say they email an excerpt of the book each week or each day to their companies with one of the takeaways. So it's been pretty cool. A couple of departments have told me it's now part of their required reading for promotion. Yeah, so it's been a pretty cool experience.
You got another book in there?
I do. So I thank you for the layup again here. So 30 Fires You Must Know is a book that I co-authored with Billy Goldfeather. Excuse me. And we take 30 fires from around the country. And these are fires that we think you should know about. And because there's been too many times that both of us have gone into firehousing and asked about a fire, we say Hackensack or the Wall Bombs fire, and people don't know what you're talking about. And we hope to bridge that gap with this book and make it where we learn the lessons of those that came before us. And one of the fires in that book talks about the Granite Mountain hotshots. Yeah. And that chapter. So we have guests that write the chapter that have something that have some knowledge of the fire. And so Kevin Woj, his father Joe, who's a retired captain out of LA County, he wrote the chapter for that. And it's just a powerful chapter, as all the chapters are. Kevin would have turned 24 just a couple of months ago, and I've become pretty good friends with Joe. I know Joe and his wife from writing this book, and he talks about wildland firefighting and talks about that. I was out in Arizona, and I went to the Granite Mountains Memorial and walked to the site, and it's powerful. And to know about it and learn about it, it's something that's a fire that all firefighters should know about, as all 30 of the fires are that are in there. And it's whether we're talking about the Granite Mountain hotshots, where we're talking about the Man Gulch fire, Young Men in Fire. I mean, there's so many lessons that we could learn, and there's so many parallels to structural firefighting that we've taken from the wildland community. I mean, our incident management team, right, is built off of, off of that. The Northwest incident management team helped the FDNY after September 11th, and then helped us build our incident management team. Now we get deployed frequently, and so it's all of that, right? That cross pollination, the parallels of and how all the firefighting communities come together. There's a lot more similarities than people would know at first blush, at first look, and then you start to dig in. And you're like, there's a lot of stuff that we do where there's cross pollination, and incident command system is certainly one of them.
Well, Frank, you're not retired. You're just picking up speed, is what I can tell.
Next chapter. That's what I like to say.
Yeah, exactly.
It's another chapter. I don't see myself ever doing nothing. Especially, I love being a firefighter. I love helping. I love being part of what we're doing. I love the mission, what we stand for at the First Responder Center for Excellence now. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk for a bit.
You bet. And I love that you embody, the culture of the family of the fire community, and that you're, focusing your next, 60 something years on advancing.
Yeah, we do. We have to. Yeah. So we are all a family, and we have to make sure that we are. One of the things that we're starting to try to address is we have to train our families, our loved ones, to understand our profession a little bit better, because they're the first responder for us. So if we come home and we had a bad scene, bad incident, whatever, and we start, and they see a change in our personality, they're the first responder for us, and we need for them to understand that and know how that they could help us. That's an important part of it. So, family first. I say that all the time, and but we have to make sure that we're keeping them in the loop on some of this stuff, and we don't do a great job of that. So stay tuned. Follow the First Responder Center for Excellence on our social media platforms, on our website. Certainly go onto our website, firstrespondercenter.org. You could get a link to our learning management system and keep up to breast on that. Our YouTube page, we keep putting new videos on there. So there's lots of stuff. Reach out to us for suggestions. If you have suggestions of things you want to see us do, let us know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Frank. And I'll put links to all those resources on the Team Wildfire website under our resources tab. Frank Leeb, so honored that you would join us here on the Fire Break today, and look forward to keeping up with what you're working on next.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, you've been watching another episode of the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. We're joined here with Frank Leeb. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at the next. Take care.